The night was colder than usual, the kind of cold that made the streets bite into the bones of those who had no place to call home. Cars sped past, their headlights casting fleeting shadows on the cracked sidewalks. A young man in a suit hurried into the warmth of a coffee shop, while across the street a figure huddled against a graffiti-covered wall, wrapped in nothing but a worn-out blanket. That figure was Maya. Once, she had been the kind of woman who turned heads in every room she entered, her laughter filling spaces like music, her eyes sparking with ambition. She had dreamed of becoming an attorney, fighting for justice where justice was often denied. She had carried herself with a dignity that couldn't be bought or faked. But tonight, none of that seemed visible to the world rushing past her. To them, she was invisible, another homeless woman, another reminder of how society turns away when it's inconvenient. But fate had its own way of weaving stories. Just a few blocks away, a black limousine pulled up to a gleaming skyscraper. Inside sat Donovan Carter, one of the wealthiest men in the city. His name was on the front page of business magazines, his face often seen on television speaking about investments, philanthropy, and the American dream. But behind the polished image was a man who had risen from nothing. A black man who had fought tooth and nail against discrimination, poverty, and endless rejection until he carved out his empire. Yet Donovan carried a memory, a name that success had never erased: Maya. She had been his first love, the girl who believed in him before anyone else did. They had met in college when he was working 2 jobs to stay afloat. While others dismissed him, she saw his determination, his brilliance, his refusal to let society's barriers define him. For a time, they had been inseparable, but life, cruel and demanding, had torn them apart. Donovan had chosen ambition, chasing opportunities that took him across states, while Maya stayed behind, committed to her own fight for justice. Somewhere along the way, their paths had diverged, and he never saw her again. That night, after finishing a board meeting, Donovan insisted on walking instead of being driven home. "I need to breathe the city," he told his driver. He stepped out, adjusting his long coat, and began walking through familiar streets that now seemed like echoes of a past life. And then he saw her. At first, his eyes didn't believe what they saw. There on the corner, beneath a flickering streetlight, was Maya, her once radiant face now marked by hardship, her hands trembling as she clutched her blanket tighter against the cold. His chest tightened, memories flooding back, the way she used to challenge him, encourage him, tell him he was destined for more. He remembered her smile, the way she carried herself with a pride that demanded respect. And now, here she was, reduced to nothing in the eyes of society. Donovan froze. The billionaire, whose signature could change markets, found himself powerless in that moment. "Maya!" His voice cracked before he could stop it. She lifted her head, startled. For a second, her tired eyes didn't register him. But then recognition flickered. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. The man before her was not the struggling student she once knew. He was a figure of power, dressed in wealth, exuding authority. "Donovan," she whispered, her voice faint, almost fragile. He stepped closer, disbelief still gripping him. "My God, what happened to you?" Her gaze dropped, shame pressing down heavier than the cold air. "Life happened." Those 2 words carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories, of dreams deferred, of systemic barriers, of a world quick to judge. A black woman for stumbling, while forgiving others for falling. Donovan crouched beside her, ignoring the curious stares of strangers walking by. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. Maya gave a bitter laugh. "You think I chose this? You think I didn't fight? I fought harder than most people will ever know. But every door I knocked on was closed. Every chance I earned was stolen. And when I had no one left..." She trailed off, her eyes glistening. Donovan felt anger rising in him, not at her, but at a system he knew all too well. He had escaped it, yes, but not without scars. "Come with me," he urged. But Maya shook her head. "I won't be your charity case, Donovan. Not after all these years." Her pride, even in her lowest moment, was unshakable. That was the Maya he remembered. The woman who had always refused to be pitied, who demanded respect, even when the world refused to give it. Donovan took a deep breath. "This isn't charity. This is me standing by someone who once stood by me. You don't owe me anything." "I owe you," She looked at him then, truly looked at him, and for a moment the wall around her seemed to crack. But old wounds are slow to heal, and dignity, once wounded, doesn't easily accept rescue. Still, Donovan didn't walk away. That night marked the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted. A confrontation, not only with the ghosts of their past, but also with the harsh truths of a society that allowed someone like Maya to fall through its cracks. And as Donovan stood there, watching the woman who had once held his heart shiver on the streets, he made a silent vow. Whatever it took, he would help her reclaim her dignity, not as a favor, not as a transaction, but as justice long overdue. Because sometimes love doesn't end with heartbreak. Sometimes it finds its way back, not to rekindle what was lost, but to restore what should never have been taken away. That night, beneath the cold city sky, their story began again. The limousine's heater hummed softly as Donovan guided Maya inside. She sat stiffly in the back seat, her fingers clutching the threadbare blanket, as though it were her last piece of safety. The plush leather interior contrasted so cruelly with her reality that she seemed almost out of place, like a storm-tossed bird resting inside a glass palace. "I don't belong here," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the engine. "You belong anywhere you choose to be," Donovan replied firmly. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Maya turned to the window, watching the city blur by. For her, these streets were not a backdrop to success, but a battlefield. Every cracked sidewalk was a memory of rejection. Every closed storefront reminded her of doors slammed in her face. When they reached Donovan's penthouse, the doorman stared as the billionaire entered with a woman whose clothes hung in tatters. Donovan caught the glance and met it with steel in his eyes. Respect wasn't optional, it was demanded. And that night he made sure Maya felt it. Inside, warmth wrapped around her, but it didn't ease her unease. The walls were adorned with art, the shelves stacked with books, every detail screaming of a life lived in power and influence. Maya lowered herself onto the edge of a sofa, as if afraid she might stain it. "Why me, Donovan?" she asked suddenly. "Why now? You could have walked past and forgotten me like everyone else." Donovan sat across from her, his hands clasped. "Because I couldn't. You're not just someone I used to know. Maya, you're the reason I believed I could become who I am. And if the world failed you, then I failed you too." Her eyes glistened, but she shook her head. "Don't romanticize my struggle. You don't know what I went through." "Then tell me," Donovan urged gently. For the first time in years, Maya allowed herself to open the vault of her pain. She spoke of graduating law school with honors, only to be turned away from firms that claimed they had no openings. She spoke of interviews where her talent was ignored, but her skin was scrutinized. She told him how she was offered jobs beneath her qualifications: assistant, clerk, receptionist, roles that kept her beneath the ceiling she was meant to shatter. For the first time in years, Maya allowed herself to open the vault of her pain. She spoke of graduating law school with honors, only to be turned away from firms that claimed they had no openings. She spoke of interviews where her talent was ignored, but her skin was scrutinized. She told him how she was offered jobs beneath her qualifications: assistant, clerk, receptionist, roles that kept her beneath the ceiling she was meant to shatter. "I fought for years," she said, her voice cracking. "And when I did get into a small firm, I thought I made it. But the cases they gave me, they sent me the ones nobody wanted, the ones meant to break me. And when I pushed back, when I demanded respect, they called me difficult." Her hands trembled as she continued. Then came the whispers. The accusations that I was too aggressive, too loud, not a good fit. They let me go, Donovan. After that, every door closed, one by one, until I was standing on the outside with no way back in. And without work, without family support, it all unraveled. I lost everything. Silence settled heavy in the room. Donovan's chest burned with fury. He knew discrimination. He had faced it himself, but Maya's story cut deeper. This wasn't just neglect. This was sabotage. "They tried to erase you," he said quietly. "They did," Maya whispered. "And they succeeded." "No," Donovan said, his voice steady, resolute. "They didn't. You're still here. That means they didn't win." But Maya shook her head. "Dignity doesn't come back once it's stolen." Donovan leaned forward. Then let's take it back. For days, he worked tirelessly. He called contacts, reached into networks, demanded meetings with people who had once dismissed him. His influence was undeniable, but he didn't offer Maya handouts. He offered her a platform. He reminded her of who she was, a brilliant mind, a woman of principle, a fighter whose voice still mattered. Maya resisted at first. Pride clashed with survival, and the scars of humiliation made her doubt every step. But Donovan refused to let her retreat into shadows. He arranged for her to meet with civil rights advocates, journalists, and organizations fighting discrimination in professional spaces. Slowly, Maya began to see that her story wasn't just hers. It was the story of countless black professionals silenced, disrespected, and discarded by systems designed to keep them out. The turning point came when Donovan accompanied her to a community forum. The room was filled with young black students, eager but uncertain about their futures. Donovan introduced her simply. "This is Maya. She has walked through fire and lived to tell it." At first, she faltered, her voice shaking. But then she looked into those eyes, young, hopeful, searching for someone who proved it was possible to rise again. And she spoke. She told them of the barriers, the betrayals, the nights she thought she wouldn't survive. But she also told them of resilience, of the power of refusing to accept society's verdict. By the time she finished, the room erupted in applause. Some cried. Others stood. Maya herself felt something. Stir deep inside her, a spark she thought had been extinguished forever. Donovan watched from the sidelines, pride swelling in his chest. This wasn't about rescuing Maya. It was about reminding her that she was never broken, just buried beneath the weight of injustice. Weeks turned into months. Maya began working with advocacy groups, using her legal knowledge to fight for others pushed aside like she had been. Journalists picked up her story, and soon her name returned, not as a victim, but as a voice for justice. She stood before cameras not as a woman, defined by homelessness, but as a fighter, reclaiming her dignity. And through it all, Donovan remained at her side, not as a savior, but as a partner, a friend, a man who had once loved her and perhaps still did. But their story wasn't about rekindling romance. It was about something deeper. It was about respect, justice, and the refusal to let society erase a black woman's worth. One evening, after speaking at a national conference, Maya and Donovan walked through the city streets once again. The same streets where he had first seen her huddled in the cold. But this time she wasn't invisible. People recognized her, greeted her, thanked her. She paused, looking up at the sky, a faint smile on her lips. "Do you realize, Donovan, that months ago I was sleeping on that corner?" "I remember," he said softly. "And now?" She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "Now I feel alive again." Donovan placed a hand on her shoulder. "Because you are. And the world is finally seeing what I always knew, that you're unstoppable." Maya exhaled, her breath mingling with the city air. She wasn't the same woman he had first fallen in love with. She was stronger now, forged in fire. And though the scars of her journey would always remain, they were no longer marks of shame, they were badges of survival. What happened next shocked everyone who had ever doubted her. Maya didn't just rebuild her life. She became a force that shook the very systems that once crushed her. She testified before Congress on workplace discrimination. She launched a foundation to support women of color pursuing law. She became a symbol, a reminder that dignity may be stolen, but it can always be reclaimed. And Donovan? He stood beside her, not in front, not above, but as an equal, proud to witness her rise, proud to know that the woman he once lost had found herself again. Because sometimes love doesn't come back in the way people expect. Sometimes it returns not as romance, but as redemption. And sometimes seeing an ex love homeless on the streets isn't the end of a story. It's the beginning of a revolution.